Good evening, everyone. I'm Abhishek Sharma, and on behalf of Link Legal, I am absolutely thrilled to welcome you to the launch of Beyond Law, a series of programs which aims to broaden our minds to subjects that have shaped our society. Subjects such as literature, art, culture, heritage, and science. Now, even though law and society are inextricably linked, very often we find that the approach that our courts adopt to the application of the law is rather clinical. And while you may find courts relying upon customs and traditions while adjudicating questions of personal law or inheritance, one would really struggle to find a recent case where customs or practices amongst traders, for instance, were employed to decide a contractual or a mercantile dispute. This series seeks to open our minds and help all of us, particularly lawyers, develop a wider view of the world. We hope that this series will aid you in viewing not just the law, but also the practice of law as a tool to advance the cause of humanity through the prism of art, culture, and literature. We are delighted that this series is being launched by an artist who is widely considered to be one of the greatest performers of our time, Naseeruddin Shah Sahab. Naseer Sahab has been very gracious in agreeing to speak about his varied experiences, including those in the world of cinema, cultural heritage, and literature. After he launches the series, Naseer Sahab will engage in what promises to be a riveting conversation with author, critic, and lawyer, Dr. Saif Mahmood. May I request Mr. Atul Sharma to make his remarks, after which he'll hand over the floor to our very special guest. Thank you.
Naseer Sahab and dear Saif, I'm indeed delighted that we are launching this series Beyond Law for the reasons that Abhishek just stated. And what better than having Naseer Sahab to launch this series? Naseer Sahab is a cine icon who commands all mediums of expression with ease. But what I like most about him is the power of expression that he has. And that is something very dear to me personally, because I had the occasion to be a part of theater at some point in time in my life. For many of us who are older, when we think of Ram, we think of Arun Govil. But when we think of Ghalib, we think of Naseer Sahab with his flowing beard and that tall woolen cap. So such as the vivid memories of his performances. Now, this series conceptualized by yours truly and Saif is essentially in the form of an adda. So we want to create an adda where we can get personalities, we can get people from walks of different life, and we can have a chat with them and really widen the horizons, more particularly of the younger lawyers. And we as lawyers are also performers in a way. On every given day that I walk into a court, and this is something which was taught to me by my first senior, I am watched by a set of 20 or 30 new people performing. Now that in itself is something, which is so akin to acting. And no wonder that we have Naseer Sahab here, and we have requested him, and he has kindly consented to be here. Every day, we of course perform in the court. And what has gone into behind that is also very, very important. Naseer Sahab, when I was in school, I had the fortune of acting under the legendary B.V. Karanth. And I was performing Tasher Desh with him, Rabindranath Tagore's famous play. And during the course of that, he did come up and explain to me that the way you speak a dialogue, the dialogue should be heard with the same intensity by the person sitting in the first row as well as the last row. And that is what theater has done to me. And it has been such a big, stock in trade for me, because every time I walk into the court, it is always an advantage to really put across the whole thing before the judge in a very, very forthright, very clear, elucidate manner. I'm sure the series will go a long way in exposing our colleagues to different facets of life and help them in becoming better lawyers. Because unfortunately, for the younger lawyers, the work-life balance has become such a big issue that we thought that we might give them an outlet which is apart from the routine 12-hour schedules and 14-hour schedules, and of course, unending work all through their life. Of course, I would like to again thank Naseer Saab for being with us today. and giving us the benefit of his experience. Yesterday at the trial, he asked us a question, which of course I came to know later. I saw the recording of that, and he asked that, am I required to be wise and profound? Well, Naseer Saab, you please be your usual self. We will be very happy if you are your usual self. And profundities we are already used to, because we do the my lords and my learned brother day in, day out. So with that, I'll hand over to Saif. And thank you, Naseer Saab, again for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Atul sir, and good evening, adab, namaskar to all of you, my colleagues and friends. It is always a great delight to hear Naseer Saab speak, and for me personally, always a singular pleasure to be in conversation with him. एक शेर है सुरूर बाराबंकवी का कि जिनसे मिलकर जिंदगी से इश्क हो जाए वो लोग, जिनसे मिलकर जिंदगी से इश्क हो जाए वो लोग, आपने शायद न देखे हों मगर ऐसे भी हैं. तो आज के हमारे मेहमान जो हैं वो वाकई ऐसे हैं जिनसे मिलकर जिंदगी से इश्क हो जाए. And to give you an example, our viewers an example, we were a bit skeptical about this session because Naseer Saab was not too well. But over the weekend, he called me and said that he's fine now and that he will be back home soon and that we must go on with this session. So thank you very much, Naseer Saab, for being here, for continuing to be an inspiration and inspiring millions, not only to live, but also to love and to love to live. Bahut shukriya aapka. We have all heard Atul sir's introductory remarks and Abhishek's remarks about why we are doing this series Beyond Law. As the curator of the series, the only thing that I want to add here is that, it is often thought that we lawyers and judges are these dry and dusted people who are sitting in tombs of legalese, negotiating contracts and drawing litigation strategies. And more often than not, it is true. People who generally the society should keep away from. Akbar al-Abadi ne to sahab yahan tak keh diya कि पैदा हुआ वकील तो शैतान ने कहा लो आज हम भी साहिब औलाद हो गए. Even I have become a parent today. So I don't know of any other profession that offers to its practitioners such a broad canvas, to study such a diverse array of subjects as law does. However, as lawyers, we tend to become institutionalized. We ghettoize ourselves and we usually don't see beyond law. And this is exactly the phenomenon that we want to break today. We want to see beyond law, and it is with this perspective. There was a consensus on how to have it launched, and everybody was, to use a legal terminology again, ad idem on the fact that the best way to launch it is with a conversation with Naseer Saab. So we will do that conversation. But before that, Naseer Saab, may I ask you to please formally launch the series Beyond Law and also say a few words about this whole idea of sensitizing lawyers to art, literature, culture, heritage, and the like.
Thank you, Saif Saab. Thank you, Atul Bhai. And it is my privilege and my nervous pleasure to formally launch this webinar on Beyond Law. And I hope I can I live up to your expectations. My father, when I was about 13 or 14, and that's the time when one decides what to do with one's life. And I knew what I wanted to do, but I dared not confess it. He would come up with a new suggestion every day or every week. Of course, he wanted me to be a doctor. My son, the doctor. I had two brothers, one of whom was studying at the National Defence Academy, the other was studying at the IIT Kharagpur. And so when I was terrified at the thought of the tomes I'd have to study as a doctor and the patience I'd have to display to each and every patient, he came up with a number of things, including try for the IAS, try for the tea gardens, which was the most adventurous thing those days. And then one day I came home with a prize for a debating competition. So he said, why don't you become a lawyer? Now I had an uncle who was a lawyer. And in his office, I'd see these row after row of books which had AIR written on them. And I think it was something to do with All India Radio. So I'd sometimes pick up one of them and open them to see what program is going to be on, when the cricket commentary will be on, etc. And I'd be completely baffled by what I saw when I opened those things. So I did not think that I had enough intelligence. I had a big problem with being considered rather intellectually challenged when I was a child. I habitually was in the last 5 in my class. Until I went to the drama school, then I was in the first 2. But I never ever seriously considered the possibility of becoming a lawyer, because there was so much that one would have to study. I hadn't a clue that in the profession I'd chosen, I'd have to study about as much, though perhaps not such voluminous books as lawyers have to study. So I did not opt to go in that direction. Also, the thought of what would I do if I knew that a client who'd come to me had done what he was accused of doing, with what kind of a conscience would I defend such a person? Or prosecute a person who I knew had not done what he was accused of doing? I thought I'd resort to a bit of acting there. And I didn't pursue my father's dream. Rather, he didn't pester me to do it, because I distanced myself from him after a point. And satisfying myself with the thought that when I become an actor, I can play all the lawyers I want to play. When I become an actor, I can play all the doctors I want to play. I can play all the army men I want to play. So that has sort of sublimated all my father's desires, I would say not mine, quite successfully. I don't know if there's anything wise or helpful that I can say to a person aspiring to be a lawyer, except just as I was not deeply influenced by the kind of movies that I saw in India, I decided to tread my own path and find my own way, because the kind of acting that I did see did not really appeal to me. The only thing I can suggest, if I may take the liberty of doing so, is that lawyers should do the same, that you should not be guided by dusty tradition, but try to discover the truth on your own, whether or not it is convenient. And basically to follow your own conscience, which is something that I have done also as an actor. So I will now close my opening remarks and submit myself to the lawyerly interrogation by Saif Mahmood Sahab. I hope I can answer all your questions satisfactorily.
I'm sure you will answer them more than satisfactorily. So thank you very much for those beautiful remarks. And actually, it's also a very important date today in Indian cinema, in the history of Indian cinema. The day we are launching this series, it is the 96th birth anniversary of Guru Dutt, who was born on the 9th of July, 1925. And which is why I'm wearing this Guru Dutt t-shirt, by the way. But thank you very much. और साहिबान, अब क्या कहते हैं, अब जिगर थाम के बैठो, मेरी बारी आई. So let me start with taking a cue from what Atul sir had said in his introduction. And it's a slightly academic question that I want to ask you, but it will put the entire discussion in perspective. And therefore, I want to start from here. Naseer Sahab, cinema is rather distinctly positioned to carry our cultural heritage, our shared history to people, to masses. And I'm not just talking of specific events, but it is well positioned to depict the socio-cultural temperament of an entire time. For instance, like Atul sir said, that Mirza Ghalib jo hai, hamari generation ke log, aap hi ko samajhte hain. Or a police inspector, the typical police inspector is personified by Iftikhar Saab, or a dacoit by Amjad Khan. How important are films as sources of historical and cultural knowledge? And secondly, my related question is, how much literary license do you think should be available to a filmmaker when it comes to making a film that depicts our cultural heritage?
I've always felt that films, I've always had doubts about film as art or films as a medium of change. I can't say I dismissed them, but I've had doubts about it. I have felt that the significant function that cinema can serve is to act as a record of its times. Because if you really look at it, cinema is the only medium that can do that. If you're talking of writing, if you're talking of sculpture, if you're writing of painting or of poetry, sooner or later, it has to resort to abstractions in order to evoke what it's trying to say. Cinema is a combination of painting, of photography, of sound, of music, of dance, of drama, of all these various arts, and it is the only medium which can capture life as it is, which is why I felt a responsibility to participate in films which try to present an accurate picture of their times, because I've always felt that for the sake of posterity, it is important that we do that. It would be a terrible tragedy if 100 years from now, people wanted to know what the India of 2021 was like, and they stumbled upon a popcorn confectionery kind of a film with 16 songs and 25 dances, and got the impression that, oh, this is what people in India did in 2021. It's very, very important that life must be depicted as it is, and cinema is the only medium, as I said, which can do that. In our country, however, what has happened is that cinema and theatre have always been joined at the hip. And that's because when cinema went into the talkie era in the early 30s, you will notice that in the silent era, there were several Parsi actors, European ladies, or Maharashtrian ladies who were fair-skinned and blue-eyed, who were the stars. When the silent cinema faded away, all these gentlemen and ladies were put on the shelf because they needed actors who could speak dialogue. And thus a whole new generation of stars came in. And where did they come in from? But from the theatre. The cinema raided the theatre full scale, whether it was not only the actors, it was also the musicians, it was the set designers, it was the choreographers, it was the music directors. Every possible talent from the theatre was sucked into the cinema. Unfortunately, these people brought along with them the sensibility that ruled that kind of theatre. And the theatre of the early 20th century in India was mainly a rehash of Shakespeare's plays, or mythologicals, or stories from the Arabian Nights, or stories like Rustam Sohrab and Laila Majnun, in all of which there was a strictly defined form in which truth always triumphed. Characters were in black and white. There were absolutely no shades of grey. Evil always met its comeuppance at the end. And every now and then, all the action stopped for a musical interlude without any particular reason. We still seem not to have been able to outlive that influence in our cinema. And that's the reason why our cinema has not been taken seriously by the intellects in our country, and the habit has come to dismiss the cinema made in Bombay as pure, piffle, which to an extent is true, but the unfortunate fallout of this is that cinema has not in our country been associated with delivering a serious message. It is only in, I would say, from around the 70s that this began to happen with the advent of filmmakers like Benazir Sahab and the other Film Institute trained directors. Though before that also there were people like Khwaja Ahmad Abbas Sahab, who was probably the first man to make songless movies, black and white movies, movies about the pavement dwellers, movies like Asman Mahal, which talked in the early 60s about a Nawab Sahab in Hyderabad who was tormented about whether he should go to Pakistan or stay on in India. These were subjects which really mattered. Unfortunately, Abbas Sahab is practically a forgotten entity in our cinema. Nobody remembers him. And that's really unfortunate. And that is because cinema has been associated in our minds basically with time pass, with eating popcorn and eating an ice cream, and going out to visit the washroom when a song you don't like comes on and so on. This is changing, but very, very gradually. It's not going to be easy to shed the habits of 100 years, and we've been making films for 100 years, and I often like to say that why are we boasting about it, because we've been making the same kind of film for 100 years. But anyway, the day will come, I think, though it may be yet far away, when cinema in our country will gain the status it deserves as an important document of its times. I think it is a very, very important medium because it can reach out to so many people simultaneously. I'm often asked this question as to why theatre is not as popular as cinema is in our country. The answer is obvious, because a play can only be done to one set of people per night, whereas a film can show to 1 million people at the same time. So it has a vast reach, and it can affect change, though so far the only visible change that has occurred is that people style their hair like Dev Sahab used to be, or used to do, or wear their clothes like a certain heroine may have done, and nothing beyond that. I have actually met a person in my life who said to me, I think I've told you this, Saif Sahab, that he said to me कि मुझे लगता है कि मुझ में जितनी अच्छाइयाँ हैं वो सब हिंदी फिल्म की वजह से हैं. And I was really puzzled by this question. I said, what do you mean? He said, देखिए, कोई भी हिंदी फिल्म आपको गलत वैल्यूज नहीं सिखाती. कोई हिंदी फिल्म ऐसी नहीं है जो ये कहती है कि चोरी करो, डाका डालो, अपने माँ बाप की इज्जत ना करो, देश से गद्दारी करो, स्मगलिंग करना सीखो, मुजरिम बनो. हर फिल्म ये कहती है कि सच्चाई की जीत होती है. तो how come when Hindi cinema is blamed for a lot of the ills besetting our society, how come this aspect of Hindi cinema escapes everybody? Which is that it's a moot point.
No, thank you very much for this elaborate answer. I'll actually bring you back to this question of theatre vis-a-vis cinema in a bit. Let me ask you another question for the moment. You know, Naseer Sahab, our artists, our writers, our scholars, their contributions to our cultural heritage themselves are part of our cultural heritage. Their life stories are part of our cultural heritage. And I've said this earlier, and I say it again, that you have done a great favor to us by documenting your life story in this stunning book, in your memoir, called And Then One Day. It is bold, it's candid, it's also funny. It's a great piece of literature which shows your craftsmanship. Also, as a writer, the turn of phrase in it, the language, the syntax is absolutely amazing. So let me ask you this. What were the impulses that led you to write an autobiography? How did you think that it was time for you to write a memoir?
I frankly didn't think I'd ever do this. I have read a few actors' autobiographies, and I was not deeply moved or affected by any of them. Perhaps the only one that I really found terribly interesting was Peter O'Toole's book, which is called Loitering with Intent. And that is mainly because it talks about how his values developed, how he grew up in Ireland, and what he saw as a child. It's also a very funny book, and it's beautifully written. It doesn't have very much to do with his work as a professional actor. It has to do with his development. What I have enjoyed reading is biographies, particularly by Mr. Simon Callow, who's written a wonderful series of books on Orson Welles and on Charles Dickens, and on several other celebrated actors. So, as I said, I did not imagine I'd ever write this book. I didn't think I had enough to say. But it so happened that around 2001, I found myself in Prague shooting for a Hollywood movie, which was quite a disaster, but from which I made a whole load of money. And as I've written in the book, I didn't know what to do with it. So I passed a computer shop and I said, why don't I buy a computer? And so I did. And then I got somebody to help me, to teach me to switch it on. And then I wondered what I should do with it. And he told me how to write on it. So I started writing.
Which year was this, sorry?
This was 2002.
So till 2002, you did not own a computer?
No, I didn't. And I was terrified of it. And even after possessing one, I was terrified for quite a while. I thought it would snap my head off, and I was in the habit of cursing at it. And somebody said, look, someday they're going to get computers which will talk back at you, so don't get into this habit. So anyway, I bought this computer and I started typing, and I said, what do I write? I said, write about myself. I'm not very great at writing fiction. So I started with I was born in, and went on. And after that shoot got over, I spent a lot of time in my makeup room, because this was a movie heavy on special effects, and so I spent many hours waiting for my shot to occur. I wrote, I would say, about 25 pages and then gave it up. When I came home, I reopened the computer again after about 6 months and started completing what I had written, or writing about something else I remembered. It's funny how these memories keep popping back into your head. And that's how it happened. That's why it took 12 years to complete, because I really didn't think it would ever be a book. Then I was encouraged by my friend Ramchandra Guha, who's a marvelous historian and sports enthusiast, and an excellent writer, a great writer himself, who's written these wonderful books on history. And he encouraged me to do it, because he said this will be a valuable document, and he says you might not make too much money out of it, but it will have a long shelf life, he assured me, after he'd read the manuscript. And so I went ahead, and as I went ahead, more and more things began to occur to me. In fact, the thought did occur to me that why don't I intersperse these chapters with a description on how I evolved as an actor. But then I talked about it with my wife, Ratna, who always gives me very sane advice. And she said, no, I think it will become too technical if you do that. Maybe you should write another book altogether on that subject. But here, stick to your own story. But my own life is not separate from my life as an actor. As I said, I dreamt of being an actor from the time I was 12 or 13. That ambition did not waver at all. I would nod my head when my dad said, try for this and try for that. But then I knew what I wanted to do, and I just pursued that. So I thought that the way I learned about acting, or the way I began to learn about acting, because I don't think it's a subject one can ever learn completely about. I don't know if that's true about law or medicine, but I suppose it is also the case, because these fields also keep evolving every now and then, just like the field of acting does. Which is why there is no such thing as a perfect performance, because you grow every day, you change every day, you evolve every day. And the same performance that you may have considered very satisfactory today, you may not feel that way 2 years from now. In fact, I know for definite that if I were to play any of the parts which have been successful in getting across to the audience I might play them with a little more intelligence now than I did at that time. Early in my career, I depended solely on emotion and passion and my desire to get across, which is what really drove me to be an actor. My desire to get across, because I was really tired of being ignored in class. I was tired of being a wallflower. I was tired of being classified as stupid. And acting and my study of drama and my study of movies has helped me not only learn about acting, but to understand about the world. And that is why the book.
It's interesting that you say that you would have perhaps done those roles differently now. I'm reminded of, there was this judge, a high court judge, who had passed a judgment which was challenged in the Supreme Court, by which time that judge had been elevated to the Supreme Court, and the challenge came before him, and he upset his own judgment. He said, well, I've become wiser now in the Supreme Court.
Really?
So,
I think it takes to admit a thing like that, particularly for a judge in the Supreme Court. It really takes tremendous courage to admit that you've been wrong, or that you didn't know it all.
That's true.
And I think a lot of actors suffer under the delusion that they've learned it all. If they've been through a course of 3 years at a drama school or a film institute or something, they don't feel that there's any more to learn. But that's a blunder to think that way.
Yeah. Like you said in your introductory remarks, and also your book reveals that you were a terrible student, always in trouble, etc. And let me just read one portion from your book, and then I will ask you my question. And this is what you say. The suspicion that I was a complete idiot began to grow into a conviction, and I had not a clue what to do about it. In spite of my falling grades, my father continued to remind me that I was basically an intelligent boy. This belief must have made it even tougher for him to swallow my increasingly dismal performance. My utter disinterest in learning anything except cricket scores and the speeches in Julius Caesar had now reached the proportions of an ailment. And then after a few pages, Naseer Saab, you name 8 film performances which you saw between the ages of 5 and 25. And you say that each one of them has had a great special influence on you, has played a significant role in shaping you. My question is, not one of them is an Indian film or an Indian actor. Why was that? Did you not see in Hindi films, or were you not impressed?
I did see Hindi films. My father was the deputy collector in Nainital when we were small. He was posted there. He never saw Hindi movies. He never allowed us to see Hindi movies except for Mr. Dilip Kumar's movies. I think he had a secret, deep admiration for Mr. Dilip Kumar. So I remember seeing films like Udan Khatola and Azad and Kohinoor, Insaniyat when I was a child in school. Simultaneously, I also saw The Wizard of Oz. I also saw Scaramouche. I saw The Golden Blade. And somehow those movies are the ones which entered my consciousness much deeper than the Hindi movies. The Hindi movies never seemed to me, never quite captured my imagination the way the American and the British movies did. And it's not due to any snobbishness. I continued seeing Hindi movies always, and I've been following them also closely, but they have never exerted any magic on me. I was never caught up in that world. And I think that was mainly due to the level of execution. Even if you see a film like Yehudi, which is considered by one of our great directors, Bimal Roy, which is set in Roman times, and then you compare it with a film like Spartacus, which one also saw as a child, the film Yehudi does not stand anywhere, nor does Udan Khatola stand anywhere with The Wizard of Oz, nor do any of the musicals like Kohinoor or anything which were very popular stand anywhere compared to the swashbuckling, the Stuart Grangers, the Douglas Fairbanks, the Errol Flynn movies, which I also saw. Somewhere I was comparing these unconsciously, and I was much more fascinated. Of course, I thought all these people in these movies are photographic tricks. These are not real people. That's why the Cowardly Lion exerted such a great influence on me, and Captain Hook in Peter Pan. We didn't make animation movies in those days, but I'm certain that had we done so and I had seen them, I would have been as disappointed as I was seeing these ones. And mind you, these were the best among the popular Hindi movies at that time. The movies that Mr. Dilip Kumar did, there was always a cut above everything else, at least his performance was. So that was really the reason, and that is my complaint still against Hindi cinema, that technically we have not reached a level which can exert a hypnotic, a mesmeric effect on me at least. Just good photography or slick editing or wonderful sets don't mean a film is technically excellent. There's a lot of other things that go into the technique of making a movie, including the writing, including the conception itself, and of course including the execution. So that's why none of those movies, as I said, affected me as deeply as these did, as deeply as Chaplin did, or as deeply as Anthony Quinn did. Not because I was snobbish about them, but because I just felt that they're not as good as these English ones.
थोड़ा सा आपकी जिंदगी की तरफ की कहानी की तरफ हम लोग चलते हैं, और आपने लिखा है कि you sold your wristwatch, you sold your cycle and your books and your warm clothes and collected a handsome sum of 500 rupees and ran away to Bombay. तो ये घर से भाग जाने की क्या जरूरत पड़ी थी आपको? And what happened when you reached Bombay? Please tell us.
I had a friend in Bombay, a lady who's the girlfriend of a friend of mine in school, whose father was in the movies. He used to play character parts, not very important ones. I was under the impression that anybody connected with movies can help you get into the film world. I mean, all he has to do is talk to some producer friend and say, okay, hey, this is a young man who wants to be an actor, so make him an actor. I have been also meeting several people over the last decades who come to me and say, कि मेरा बेटा पढ़ता नहीं है, आप इसको actor बना दो. So I don't blame them for believing that, because I myself believed that. I was studying in this college called Nanak Chand Arya Samaj College in Meerut. After school, I hadn't gotten admission anywhere else because my grades were so poor. And I was living in my grandfather's house in Meerut, in Circular Road. And I was really fed up with going to, having to study physics and chemistry and mathematics and things like that. And I just wanted to get out of that. I was very unhappy. I wasn't on good terms with my parents. They were kind of despairing. I had two brothers who were shining. I just thought that I need to go to Bombay and tell everybody I want to be an actor, and I'm the best actor in the world, so what is the problem? I mean, the moment they see me act, they're going to fall over themselves, and I'll become a star very soon. I genuinely believed this. I was 16 years old then. So this friend of mine misguidedly encouraged me. She thought I was coming there for a brief visit. So she hosted me for a while. And I landed up, I was received, I was taken to an aunt's bungalow where I stayed on Mount Mary for a while, until they realized that I had no intention of returning. And then I was very politely asked to find some other means of life, of existence, go and live somewhere else. So I got a place in a zari factory in Madanpura, where I would sleep at night, and in the day I'd wander around, I'd go to the studios, I'd make the rounds of the studios, I'd try and visit producers' offices. Of course, I never got to meet anybody. And I ended up acting as an extra in two movies, in one of which still exists. In fact, Rakshanda Jalil is writing an article in the Taj magazine about it, and there is a photograph of that movie. It's called Aman. It had Mr. Rajendra Kumar in it, and I'm there in one shot, and that shot still exists. I was there. I was paid 7 rupees 50 paisa for each day, 2 days work, 15 rupees, which was in 1966 quite a large amount. And I thought, yeah, I'm on my way. And I didn't give a thought to what my parents were going through. I never wrote them a letter. They had no idea where I was. They didn't even know if I was alive. They feared, since I often got into squabbles and fights and so on, they feared I might have been, murdered or something like that. My father was a warrior anyway. My mother kept praying. And then finally they got in touch with, as luck would have it, Mr. Dilip Kumar, who my father happened to know through his eldest sister, Sakina Appa, who used to come to Ajmer, where my father was the administrator of the Dargah, Gharib Nawaz. And they found me sitting on the pavement and packed me off home. But not before I spent a week or so at Mr. Dilip Kumar's house. I met him on one occasion. Very hesitantly, I approached him with my legs shaking and told him what my dreams were, and he dismissed me immediately and said, I think you should go back and study. People from good families should not try to become actors. I didn't ask him how he had become an actor in that case. But I was then packed off home, and it was greatly embarrassing to go back and to be mocked by everybody. But anyway, that's a different story. So that's how it happened, and it was a crash course in growing up. And I often wonder how I survived those 2.5 months in Bombay without a friend, without any place to stay, with no money, with no means of earning, without any work. My guardian angel was looking after me. Anything could have happened to me at the age of 16, but nothing did, except for the fact that I appeared as an extra in Hema Maliniji's first movie, and I told her about that, and I worked with her, that you and I made our debuts together. That's a film called Saudagar, in which you can't spot me no matter how hard you try.
But did you ever bring this up with Dilip Saab? That
No,
he dismissed you?
no, I did not have the courage. I was too awed by him. Like every other actor in India, Dilip Saab was the ultimate. There were Shammi Kapoor fan. I was a Shammi Kapoor fan myself. There were Deva Anand fan. There were Raj Kapoor. But Dilip Saab was something else. He was removed. He was above them all. And as I said, my legs were trembling when I met him when I was 16 years old, and he was kind to me but firm. Then when I finally did meet him, we worked in this film called Karma together, and the publicity machine made it out into a duel, which was going to happen. It was a one-sided duel, and I knew I was not in the same orbit as Dilip Saab, so I did not approach this thing like a duel at all. But I was terribly, terribly nervous about it, and that's the only time I think I've been nervous while acting in my life. And we did talk of this and that, but most of the time I was too terrified to even approach him, apart from greeting him in the mornings and sitting around while he held forth. But no, I never had the courage to tell him about this story, and I don't think he would have remembered it either. I don't think it had any deep impact on him, like many of the young people who come to me to ask for advice.
Naseer Saab, there are a number of
Dilip Saab and I were in the same hospital just a few days ago. Yes, I was there for suspected pneumonia, and of course he has been suffering with multiple complaints for a long time.
Yes.
I found that he was also there. So I was very touched that he came to visit me and put her hand on my head and blessed me and said, Sahab was asking about you. And I was deeply moved by this. I wanted to meet him before I left, the day I left, but unfortunately the day I left, he also left.
It was leaving the world a poorer place, a much poorer place. And Naseer Saab, there are, like Atul sir mentioned, and you also mentioned, that there are a number of similarities between actors and lawyers. Sure. And we will talk about them. The foremost similarity that comes to my mind, of course, is that both of us act. Litigators perform in court almost every day, the same way as actors perform on stage, with the additional disadvantage of having a judge decide real life issues for us, for our clients. And the one thing that we are taught as lawyers as a thumb rule is never get emotionally invested in your client's case. Mm-hmm. So my question is, I'm sure my colleagues would be very curious to know, when you act, do you get emotionally invested in the role or the character, or do you actually dissolve into the fictional moment, forgetting that there is a person called Naseeruddin Shah?
No, I don't think that can ever happen. One has to invest emotionally in it, and to make your emotion as real, to try to put yourself into the shoes of the character, just as a lawyer has to try to put himself into the shoes of the client and to understand what made him do what he did. It doesn't do to be emotionally removed like a doctor has to be, or like a lawyer has to be. Of course, actors are helped by the fact that we have dialogue given to us, which lawyers, I assume, aren't, or are they? I don't know whether lawyers rehearse what they're going to say in court the day before or the morning before. But as actors, we certainly have to do that. And it is important because you have to reason your way through as a lawyer, not emote your way through. I'm sure if a lawyer tended to get too emotional in court, he would be reprimanded by the judge. And of course, it's really quite ludicrous the way law courts are presented in our movies, but that's another matter. But then, which profession is presented accurately in our movies? The other similarity is that we both have to use our voices a great deal. And I have some lawyer friends who were on the verge of losing their voices and say that, after talking for several hours in the court, my voice begins to get tired. But that happens to actors as well. And that's why I think it's very important for lawyers to take good care of their voices. As an actor, one has to try and discover the expressiveness, if any, that there is in you. I did that as a child by gazing into the mirror, not admiring myself, but examining myself and seeing whether this kind of look works or that kind of look works, and trying to understand whether this was not a foolish dream at all. But the use of the voice, I think, is very, very important in the teaching profession, in the lawyering profession, and in the acting profession. And that is why I would recommend to all young lawyers, or even older lawyers who have trouble with their voices, to take good care. And the only way to take good care of your voice is to practice singing. If you'll never find a singer with a bad voice, because they're always in sur. In speaking too, there is such a thing as speaking in sur, and I think that would be very important for a lawyer to do that. What I have always admired is that you people are able to keep so many elements in your head all the time. There are so many inputs that you have to draw upon. There are so many precedences that you have to know about, not just know the information, but to have knowledge about when you are arguing a case. That's not the case with actors. When we are through with one job, we are through with it. When I'm through with the job, I don't dwell on it. It doesn't stay with me, though I may have invested myself fully, emotionally in it. But as an actor, it is necessary to do that. As a lawyer, I can understand why it's not.
And also, there are other differences that as lawyers, when we are arguing, we also need to think on our feet while we are arguing, because the questions that are thrown from the bench and from the other side, that is also one primary difference.
Yeah, well, I'd say an actor has to do that as well. An actor has to do that as well, because it's like the state of readiness has to be like that of a boxer in the ring.
Yes.
You have your moves planned, you have your strategy planned, you know what you're going to do, but then the unexpected may occur. And when it occurs, you have to be ready for it. And that is why my unbounded admiration for lawyers, because you have to retain so much in your head. As actors, we just have to retain the dialogue, which in any case has been given to us.
Yes. Well, let me take you to cinema. And, D.W. Griffiths is one of the most influential names in cinema history. I have a quote from him here, and then I will ask you my question. He says, "I foresee no possibility of venturing into themes showing a closer view of reality for a long time to come. The public itself will not have it. What it wants is a gun and a girl." Do you agree with this, that the public is not ready and it's a question of supply and demand, and that's why bad films are being made?
No, I don't agree. It may have been true for Mr. Griffith's time, but I think the public is ready. The public is blamed, in our country particularly, the public is blamed for the shoddy quality of work that we produce. Public ko ye chahiye, isliye hum, it's not true. It reflects the taste of the people who make those films, not the people who see them. The public does not want to see rubbish. They want to see light-hearted froth a lot of the time, but definitely not meaningless, completely meaningless stuff. Anybody loves listening to a good story. And what cinema does is to tell a story in pictures. The public, I don't think, has ever rejected a film which has had worth. Whether you're talking Guru Dutt, whether you're talking Bimal Roy, whether you're talking Mughal-e-Azam, whether you're talking Ganga Jamna, whether you're talking of some of the recent movies, the public has always embraced something which stimulates their minds. Not the majority of the public, maybe. Not those who go there to whistle and throw coins at the screen when their favorite hero takes off his shirt, but those who want a mental stimulation. I think that the public today, particularly in India, is more than ready to embrace good work, and the encouraging sign is that there are more and more younger filmmakers who are coming forth with subjects which really matter to them, are not only concerned with making time pass movies. The days of the girl and the gun are numbered, and I think that need will no longer be there in some time.
Would you also say the same of in Hindi film songs? Because the lifespan of songs that are written and sung today is much shorter than the lifespan of great songs, and songs themselves have been a very important part of our, not only of our cinema but also of our literature. एक जमाने में साहिर, मजरू, कितने लोग एक साथ, आनंद बख्शी साहब, गुलजार साहब तक ये बात बिल्कुल सही थी. पर अब जिस तरह के गाने लिखे जा रहे हैं, उसकी भी क्या यही वजह है जो आप बता रहे हैं?
वोकैबुलरी ही बदल गई है जिंदगी की, तो फिर पोएट्री की भी वोकैबुलरी भी बदलनी है. And the tastes are becoming a little more, let's say a little more boorish, let's say. The thrill is what is needed. But for ages, Hindi film songs were the only form of popular music in our country. And Hindi film music absorbed so many elements from all over the world, all kinds of music. Whether it was rock and roll, whether it was jazz, whether it was symphonies, people like Naushad Sahab, people like Mr. Ghulam Muhammad, people like Khayyam Sahab. These people were learned musicians. They were not two-penny street corner musicians. They were learned, and they absorbed the influences. So Hindi film music, the reputation that it has is not unfounded at all. It has served a tremendous purpose, and it evolved a form of its own by assimilating all these forms into itself and making it our own. Or you'll also see that it's not only the Hindi film music of the 50s or the 60s which is still immortal, but even if you look at Western music, it is still the Bob Dylans and the Simon and Garfunkels who even the younger generation who goes in for electric rock or metal pop, whatever they call it, they are aware of this tradition of music.
Because it transcends time, doesn't it?
Sorry?
I think it transcends the test of good music or of good lyrics is that they transcend times, their own.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And as I was saying, since the vocabulary of our lives has changed, we hear much cruder language spoken in life than we did 40, 50 years. Similarly, the language of poetry, you no longer hear a word like zulf or ghataएं or any of the beautiful evocative terms. What you hear is मैं तेरी Coca-Cola, तू मेरी Pepsi-Cola. I mean, which is really
वो सागर खयामी साहब का कथा है कि दिल लुटे जहाँ को मिटे खासा जमाना हो गया, दिल लुटे जहाँ को मिटे खासा जमाना हो गया, खत्म दुनिया से मोहब्बत का फसाना हो गया, और झुककर ये कहा कान में टैगोर ने इकबाल से, इलू इलू हिंदुस्तान का कौमी तराना हो गया. तो ये
sad but true.
यही बात है जो आप कह रहे हैं. यस नजीर साहब, एक दूसरे एस्पेक्ट की तरफ आते हैं. You have worked with great names in theatre. You worked with Al-Qazi Saab, and he was, as all of us know, trained in the Western European theatre. His urban theatre approach was very well known. So I have two related questions to theatre. Firstly, have we in India been able to produce a good indigenous theatre?
No.
If you answer that first.
No, we haven't. And that is because we haven't drawn upon our thousands of years of tradition in the theatre. Indian theatre, Sanskrit theatre has been around for centuries. Like the Chinese theatre, like the Japanese No, which is always performed in temples. In Kerala, there are also temples where the theatre, the Kuttampalam was always a theatre in it. The ancient Greeks conducted theatre like a religious ritual. And that is why the religious connotations have never left theatre. Unfortunately, a lot of people just think that bowing to the theatre, doing pranam or touching your forehead to the stage is all that's required. It angers me greatly. In fact, Al-Qazi Sahab was the one who shouted at one of the students who came to a rehearsal one day and started doing this to the stage. And he said, I don't ever want to see you doing that. because that does not show your respect for the stage. What shows your respect for the stage is how many drops of sweat you drop on it. So don't ever let me see you do this again. If it matters so much to you, come here at 5 in the morning and do all your obeisances to the theatre when nobody's around. That really affected me greatly. And though I never do this kind of thing, I have great respect for the stage, but I don't display it. I believe my respect for the stage comes across in the efforts that I put in order to do it. But we've not been able to develop an indigenous form. The reason is mysterious, because we have a tradition of playwriting which is hundreds of years old, but we have not been able to find a form which, as the music of Naushad Sahab was, which drew upon the past and created something new. Here we have not drawn upon the past. Here there was a time in the 70s when one was greatly optimistic, because there was Girish Karnad writing plays, there was Mohan Rakesh writing plays, there was Vijay Tendulkar writing plays, there was Badal Sarkar, and there were several others who original playwrights who were tackling stories which were not about thwarted love or about family squabbles. They were about subjects which evoked larger issues. But unfortunately, these gentlemen left no successors, and that the craft of playwriting did not really evolve in our country for several years. And I don't know if that will happen unless we can shed the influence of the West, the absurdist movement, which we aped greatly during the 70s, unless we can find our own idiom and our own way of doing it. And for that, we need to go back to the folk theatre and to the traditional forms and learn from them, which we haven't really done. Even Al-Qazi Sahab, great man as he was, deeply committed to the theatre, mostly did Western plays, mostly adaptations of Western plays translated into Urdu. But his orientation was Western. The good that it did was that it also brought with it the discipline that is there in the Western theatre. And that is what he imparted to the theatre in India. I don't know how many people are following his example. There are, I think, more than 500 graduates of the National School of Drama in Delhi. Maybe I'm in Bombay. Maybe I'm overstating it. Maybe there are 200. But of those 200, there are barely 5 or 10 who are actually doing theatre. And that's probably because they don't see a purpose in doing it. And the only purpose they ever saw was to use it as a stepping stone into something more lucrative.
You've answered both my questions, actually. So I'll go to my, I think, another issue. एक बड़ी पुरानी debate है नसीर साहब, art for the sake of art alone. You know, this American director Martin Scorsese, he says cinema is a matter of what is in the frame and what is not. And then at the same time, Godard says that the decision where to place your camera, the angle at which you place your camera is really a political decision. So do you believe in art just for the sake of art? Do you think art can be apolitical, only entertainment?
There was a time when I believed that. I didn't think that art had any other purpose except to be beautiful for its own sake. In being introduced to Ghalib's poetry, later to Faiz's poetry, and even later to Iqbal's poetry, which is very, very complicated, and I can't claim that I know much of it or I'm familiar with much of it, but it made me realize that this is not so, and beauty can only exist if it has substance in it. Beauty for the sake of beauty is meaningless, and it serves no purpose apart from providing a temporary thrill. I really feel that art which does not evoke deeper feelings, or art which does not talk of larger issues, no matter in what form, because a lot of people mistake Faiz's poetry to be romantic poetry, which it isn't. Or Ghalib's poetry, or Omar Khayyam for that matter. I thought Omar Khayyam is only talking about wine and women all the time. The deeper philosophical implications of Omar Khayyam escaped me completely. So I think no, I think it is essential. I think everything you do is political. Every decision you take is political. Whether it is how you deal with your children, whether it is how you deal with your employees, or whether it is, and I think it began even earlier than that, when my brother, my eldest brother Zahir, to whom I owe a great deal in terms of my taste in literature, gave me this book called Animal Farm to read. When I think I was about 12 years old, he said, "You've got to read this book." And I read it and I said, "Wow, this is a very funny story." And he said, "No, it's not a funny story at all." And he explained to me what Animal Farm was really talking about. It's not about animals at all. It's about a much larger issue. And it was a bingo moment for me, because all I knew about communism at that age was that communists don't believe in God, and that communists are horrible people. But then I read this book, and it made a great deal of sense to me. And that is, I think, something which planted the seeds in my mind, which took a long time to sprout, but they finally did. And I think that art is only meaningful if it carries deeper implications.
Then why did the art cinema of the 1970s, that experiment, really not stand the test of time?
Because I think they were talking, they weren't really talking of anything new. I mean, they were talking of the injustices to the working class. They were talking of the caste system. But then Manmohan Desai was also talking about Mazdoor's problems, and the caste system was always been talked, even by people like V. Shantaram, who was a great filmmaker at one time. And on top of that, the films were dreary. These people dismissed popular cinema completely, not bothering to analyze what drew so many audiences to it, and what it contained that provided the thrill. These filmmakers did not really provide the thrill along with the content. I think no matter how serious your topic is, you got to hold the listener's interest. You can't give a dry dissertation and expect that anybody will be interested in what you're saying. You have to somehow hold the listener's interest, and I don't think they managed to do that. And that movement petered out mainly because I think there was an issue of integrity in those filmmakers. I worked with a lot of them, so I can speak for that firsthand. And also a lack of conviction somewhere. Most of them jumped onto the bandwagon as soon as they could, which makes one feel that they were making those films out of necessity, not out of conviction. Another generation of filmmakers has come around now, and I have hope that these people will do better and their work will be longer lasting.
You've been very critical of commercial cinema, yet you have acted in a number of such movies, from Dirty Picture to Blueberry Hunt, और इस तरह की पिक्चरों में भी आपने काम किया है, तो क्यों?
मैं हीरो
बनना आपको नापसंद?
कौन हीरो नहीं बनना चाहता? I never denied that I wanted to be. My first dreamt of being an actor because I wanted to be popular. I wanted to be known. I wanted to be rich. I wanted people to recognize me on the street. I didn't think that I'd ever end up studying. I didn't think there was anything to study in acting. I thought I knew it all when I was 14 years old. और कौन है ऐसा जो हीरो नहीं बनना चाहता? Everybody, all of us wants to be a hero, no matter in what profession we ended up. But we all wanted to be heroes. I'm sure every lawyer, every doctor, every engineer, every aviator, every army man wants to be a hero. I wanted to be this kind of a hero. So I tried my hand at these movies, despite not liking them, despite not seeing many of them myself, which I didn't see many of those movies that I did. But I did want to be popular. And that is why I did those movies like Sunaina or like Khwab or Kanhaiya or whatever it was. Also because a lot of them were rip-offs of Western movies, and these were. I've actually acted in a version of Oliver, the musical Oliver, in which I played Fagin. I've also acted in a version of various other movies. The Godfather. There have been several made. I was actually at one point handed a video cassette of The Godfather and told that we were making this. So I said, Why are you giving me this? I've seen it lots of times. नहीं, हम इसको जरा adapt करेंगे. And then a week later, I'm handed a cassette of Mughal Azam by the same person. So I said, what's happening here? He said, नहीं कि हम इन दोनों को mix करेंगे. So, that is the prevalent attitude by and large in the commercial film industry. That's why I'm so critical of it, because these people don't bother to apply their mind. They don't consider they have any sense of responsibility, apart from making sure that their investments quadruple. Making a good movie is the last thing on most people's minds.
Yeah. अच्छा, ऐसा कोई रोल है क्या आपके जहन में जो आप सोचते हो कि यार काश ये रोल मैंने किया होता?
Well, I have dreamt of doing several. Don Quixote being the top of the list. I would still love to play Don Quixote on the stage. Unfortunately, the play that's about him is a musical. So I've been trying to learn singing for the last 10 years or so. I haven't made much progress, but someday I will do that on the stage. I'm determined. But otherwise, no, because I've had my share. I've done so many movies and so many plays that I'm pretty satisfied with what life has offered me. I don't covet anything. I don't feel I've missed out on anything. I don't even feel I've missed out on major stardom, though it eluded me and I wanted it. But I don't think I've missed out on anything, because as much as I lost has been gained by the stimulation that learning about acting and training young actors has provided me. So I would say no, there is no part that I feel I should have got and didn't, including the Gandhi. Yeah. I managed to play Gandhi several times after that.
And conversely, Naseer Sahab, is there...
No, sorry.
No, please go ahead.
No, I was going to say that the Gandhi thing I'm asked about a lot of the time. I wasn't dying to play Gandhi. I was dying to become an international star, quite simply.
Well, so conversely, let me ask you this. Is there any role you wish you had not played?
No, because whatever I chose to do, I did out of my own choice. Nobody put a gun to my temple and said, you got to do this. I don't regret anything. And there have been several disasters. There have been movies in which I was absolutely dreadful, but I could not bear to watch myself. But I still don't regret having done them, because you chalk it all up to experience. No, nothing is ever wasted, is what I believe. Whatever life dishes out to you has got a lesson hidden in it somewhere. So even among the worst movies I've done, I don't regret having done them. I never enjoyed them, but I don't regret having done them, because I did them because at that time I wanted to.
So amongst your co-actors of the same generation or older, किसके साथ आपको काम करने में सबसे ज्यादा मजा आया? 2-3 नाम अगर आप बता पाएं.
Shabana tops the list, of course. I've done so many films with her. She was a big star when I began. And yet, over the years, she agreed to do several films with me, in some of which I was the lead and she was the secondary part, but she very sportingly agreed to do those films. And she was always very positive and very encouraging, and always made me feel that, you can do it. I owe her a lot. All these performances I did with her, I could not have done without her. Then there was my great dream of working with Mr. Dilip Kumar, which finally came true in this film called Karma, which I didn't really like. And also I never really got to work with him because our scenes were mainly shot separately. I really don't know why. But I never got to interact with him. In fact, at one point I was toying with writing a script about a wrestler who's been trained, a young wrestler who's been trained in the classical tradition, and whose great dream it is to wrestle with Dara Singh, because Dara Singh, when we were children, was the epitome of strength. Dara Singh had become, like "Aap Dara Singh banna chahte ho" kind of thing. He had become a brand in himself, and but the kind of wrestling Daraji was involved in was, as you know, this completely rigged kind of thing that you see on television these days. And this young wrestler, when he comes in finally does come to face with old Daraji, he finds that this whole business is rigged and this is not what I wanted. But I never got too far with that script. But working with you made me toy with the idea of writing a script of that sort. But I had the privilege of watching him work, and a couple of shots that I did with him. It was truly awesome to be with an actor who you've watched since you were 5 years old, and to see him, vibrate at you. That was a great feeling, though very, very brief. Then, of course, no, there have been many. Om is a person I love working with. We were friends.
Farooq Sheikh, you have worked with a lot.
Yeah, Farooq, marvelous actor, both gone now, unfortunately. But Farooq and Om both were my favorites, both in terms of their performances and both in terms of the interaction that I had with them. Arshad Varsi is a person I really enjoy working with. I think he's a marvelous actor who doesn't take himself seriously at all.
I was going to ask you this question. I've asked you this earlier, and there is a question in the chat box, a similar question. Among the younger lot, are there any actors that kind of inspire you and in who you place hope?
Oh yes, I not just place hope, I envy these guys. There's so many of them. Absolutely marvelous actors. Irfan Khan, Nawazuddin Siddiqui, Arshad, as I mentioned, Rajkumar Rao, Gajendra Rao, several. And I envy them because they are getting the kind of opportunities I would have loved to have got in my time, but never did. And they are much more savvy, they are much more skillful than I was at that age. I really think that there's this marvelous actor called Gulshan Devaiya who is not very much acclaimed, but everything I've seen him in has really shaken me up. Among the girls, there are people like Konkona, there are people like Alia Bhatt, who are absolutely amazingly gifted and dedicated. Vidya Balan. These are girls who are, and they're also lovely people who don't take their stardom too seriously, and who believe that conviction is what is the key, which is what I believe as well.
Thank you. Naseer Sahab, I have two more questions to ask you before we end this conversation. But if you permit me, there are two questions in the chat box that I'd like to take.
Sure.
The first question is, it's from Parveen Mahtani. He says, you said, I did not even have the satisfaction of being rejected. Rejection is common amongst many, including lawyers. Could you please share your views about the motivating factors that made you bounce back?
The satisfaction of being rejected was when I was in school in St. Joseph's, Nainital, where we were in boarding school, and they did a magnificent annual concert every year. Both my brothers acted in them. One of them even got a Best Actor award, Zahir. I never even got an opportunity. I was never even considered. Most of these plays were operas, and I couldn't sing a note, so I was not even considered. And also, it was always the teachers' pets who got the best parts. And that's why I wrote that I did not even have the satisfaction of being considered, and then said, no, this one is better. I never got a chance. There would be this elocution contests every year, in which again I never got an opportunity. And I knew I could do as well or perhaps better than the people who were representing our class, but never got the opportunity. I think to answer that question, it is that that is probably what fed the fire. That is probably what was the fuel that gave me the rage to prove myself in this field, because I knew I could not prove myself intellectually. I thought that this is a way in which I could do it, and it was this initial dismissal of my abilities and the discouragement that I faced at the hands of these missionaries who taught us, who did also contribute a lot of good things, the English that I learnt, the sensibilities that I picked up, and so on. But I also resent the fact that I was always relegated to the category of idiot and no good. That didn't do my confidence any good, but it fed the fire.
So that question about younger lot actors was from Shilpa Bhushan. I'm going to ask you one more question before I turn to mine. And this again is from the same person, Parveen Mahtani. And the question is a personal one. Ratna ji has been a driving force in your life. Can you please share your views on the role of woman in man's career?
What? She has her own career. I don't see why the woman should always be a backup force. Behind every man, there is a successful woman. The woman has her own identity. The woman has her own dreams. The woman has her own abilities, her own talents, her own skills, and that is something I feel very lucky to have stumbled upon a person like Ratna. It was purely by chance that we met, and I knew very quickly that this is the kind of person I want to share my life with, without even knowing her properly well enough. So she's been the one who's been turning the screws on me. She's the one who gives me the best advice, the harshest criticism, and the one who's always been a pillar of support despite having her own dreams. She has never put kept me as a priority. She's had her own life, and she's a very skillful actress herself. She's a very committed person, far more intelligent than I am, far better read than I am. And I turn to her for help on any occasion, whether it is about any of my performances, whether it is about something I've written, whether it is something I've read, I want to share it with her. It's she's been my fuel, but I don't consider her just a backup support for me. No, she's much more than that.
In a conversation with both of you at the launch of your book in Ajmer, I had asked her this question, that Naseer Saab has directed you. How is the experience? She answered in just one line. She said, "Ye sari kasar wahi nikal lete hain." So,
because at home at home he directs me.
Ji. So Naseer Saab, my last...
It's a pleasure to direct a person like her. Like it's a pleasure to direct actors like Manoj Pahwa or Seema Pahwa, who are absolutely magnificent actors, because they cotton on very quickly. And if you ask them to do something, even though we may have a disagreement about it, they do what I asked them to do, and they do it better than I expected. So that's... Yeah.
So thank you. Since we are now running out of time and we have taken a lot of your time, my last two questions. एक तो ये बताइए, और बहुत जरूरी सवाल है ये. I was hearing and reading Judi Dench had somewhere said that actors don't read enough. और फिर वो जॉन एलिया का बहुत मशहूर जुमला है और बहुत ही मानीखेज जुमला है कि बहुत सारे लोगों को पढ़ना चाहिए मगर वो लिख रहे हैं. तो क्या ख्याल है आपका इस बारे में? How important is reading, not just for actors, but for anyone whose work touches public lives, including lawyers?
Whether it touches public life or not, I think it's essential. As I said before, everything I know, whatever I know about the world, about politics, about life, about relationships, about interactions between people, about love, about marriage, about friendship, I've learned through the theatre. And I've learned it because I have read so much writing by great writers. Apart from the fact that Zahir introduced me to Somerset Maugham and O. Henry and Agatha Christie and people like that, on my own I discovered the ancient Greek plays, the ancient Sanskrit plays. I've even read through some of Agha Hashar's stuff. I've read Prithviraj Kapoor Sahab's plays which he did. I didn't care much for them, but each of them gave me something which is precious. And one cannot emphasize enough the importance of exposing yourself to great writing, because it's not only the thoughts, it is also the andaz-e-bayan, which is of essential importance.
आप वैसे अभी मुझे ये ख्याल आया, आप सोचते किस जबान में, अंग्रेजी में कि उर्दू में?
मुझे लगता था कि मैं अंग्रेजी में सोचता हूँ, क्योंकि अंग्रेजी मैं काफ़ी रवानी के साथ बोलता था. जब से हम लोग बोर्डिंग स्कूल में गए उससे पहले ऑफ कोर्स उर्दू बोलते थे घर पे। उर्दू वो पहली ज़बान थी जो मेरे कानों में पड़ी और जो मैंने बोलनी सीखी। फिर अंग्रेज़ी बोलने लगे हम लोग स्कूल में जाके, तो घर आके अम्मी से बातचीत ही नहीं होती थी क्योंकि अम्मी अंग्रेज़ी नहीं जानती थी और हम अंग्रेज़ी में ही बात करते रहते थे हर वक्त। जब मैंने अपनी इस किताब का तर्जुमा करना शुरू किया, तब मुझे ख्याल आया कि मैं I think I'm able to write more evocative sentences in Urdu than I was able to write in English. In fact, I'm very proud of that translation. I don't know if you read it. Urdu mein bhi wo chhapi hai.
Yes, yes.
It's exactly the same as the...
In fact, I remember that you had a brush with the law. It was plagiarized in Karachi, and then we had to issue legal notice to get it stopped.
Yes, and I believe you have a copy of that book. I must ask you for it someday. The one that came out in Pakistan. I don't know who wrote, who translated it. I don't think of the translation what it must be like. हाँ, मुझे ख्याल है कि जो जुमले आसानी से निकल जाते हैं मेरी ज़बान से, वो उर्दू में ही होते हैं। अंग्रेजी में मुझे I have to fall back upon P.G. Woodhouse or any of the great writers that I have read. The brush with the law. Yes, I must thank you for that.
Yeah, Ijaz Zahid Sahab, our friend, our colleague lawyer from Karachi is here. He's listening to us, and he's written, hey, brush with the law. He was the one who issued notice and got it stopped.
I must thank Ijaz Sahab profusely because he was very kind and he went out of his way to help me out of that jam. Because had people read that dreadful translation, I don't know what they would have thought of my book. So, salam, बहुत शुक्रिया आपका।
नसीर साहब, अच्छा ये हम यहाँ बताते जाएं कि जब when we are talking of उर्दू की आप उर्दू में सोचते हैं या उर्दू बोलते हैं, तो ये आज के हमारे जो अटेंडीज हैं, इनके लिए मैं ये क्लैरिफाई करना चाह रहा हूँ कि ये जिस जबान में हम लोग इस वक्त बातें कर रहे हैं और जिस जबान में हम लोग आमतौर पे बात करते हैं, जिसको हिंदुस्तानी या हिंदी कहा जाता है, उसी का नाम उर्दू है। ये हम लोग कोई बहुत पर्सनलाइज किसी जबान की बात नहीं हो रही है। और अगर आप इजाजत दें तो एक कथा सुना दूं। मैंने आपको पहले भी सुनाया था। एक बार दिल्ली में गोश्त मिलना बंद हो गया था बिकॉज देयर वाज एन एनवायरमेंटल लॉ इशू। अगेन लॉयर्स आर टू ब्लेम फॉर सो मेनी थिंग्स। देयर वाज एन एनवायरमेंटल लॉ इशू एंड द एबेटोर वाज शट। तो दिल्ली में गोश्त मिलना बंद हो गया था। तो सागर खयामी, दिस ग्रेट सटायरिस्ट, वाज इन दिल्ली। उन्होंने पढ़ा कि 1 महीना हो गया है बंद है हम पर मटन, दावतों में खा रहे हैं भिंडियां अहले सुखन। 1 महीना हो गया है बंद है हम पर मटन, दावतों में खा रहे हैं भिंडियां अहले सुखन, और खा के घुइयां जरूरी, खा के घुइयां क्या दिखलाएं शायरी का बांकपन, हो गए पालक का पत्ता नाजुकी से गुलबदन। और नफरतों की जंग में देखो तो क्या क्या हो गया, नफरतों की जंग में देखो तो क्या क्या हो गया, सब्जियां हिंदू हुई बकरा मुसलमान हो गया। तो यही हमारी जबानों के साथ भी हुआ है। हमने उर्दू को एक मजहब से जोड़ दिया है, हिंदी को एक और मजहब से जोड़ दिया है। ये बिल्कुल गलत बात है। जबानों का मजहब नहीं हो सकता। मजहब की तो जबान हो सकती है लेकिन जबानों का मजहब नहीं हो सकता। ये एक ही जबान है, इसको वैसे ही सुनना चाहिए, इसको वैसे ही बोलना चाहिए।
जैसा कि जावेद अख्तर साहब ने कहा था कि जबान का ताल्लुक रिलीजन से नहीं है, रीजन से है।
रीजन से, जी हाँ, उसमें से एल
और आपको
आए निकाल दिया गया।
हैरत हुई सुनकर कि जब मैं एक जो नाटक मैंने किया था किस्मत आफा की कहानियों का, उसमें एक महाराष्ट्रियन लड़की रही थी जिसको मैं उर्दू के तलफ़ुज़ सिखा रहा था। तो कह रहे थे सर आप हमें ये फॉरेन लैंग्वेज क्यों सिखाना। मैंने कहा बेवकूफ़, तुम मुझे दुनिया का कोई और मुल्क बता दो जिसमें जहाँ उर्दू बोली जाती है, पाकिस्तान के अलावा। उर्दू हिंदुस्तानी
वहाँ भी इम्पोज की हुई है पाकिस्तान में।
और वो ज्यादा वहाँ हजारों और जबानें हैं, बहुत ही खूबसूरत बलूची भी है और पुश्तो भी है और दरी भी। तो ये कहाँ से फॉरेन जबान हो गई। इनफैक्ट को बड़ा दुख हुआ मुझे पढ़ के कहीं पर कि कुछ यूनिवर्सिटीज में उर्दू इज बीइंग नाउ कैटेगराइज्ड एज अ फॉरेन लैंग्वेज बोर्न एंड ब्रेड एंड स्पोकन इन इंडिया। तो
इन द स्ट्रीट्स ऑफ दिल्ली
बहुत गलत हुआ
जी। तो जी, तो नसीर साहब, मेरा आखिरी सवाल है, उसके बाद हम जो है आपको बाइज्जत बरी कर देंगे। आखिरी सवाल मेरा ये है कि फॉर अ मोमेंट लेट अस फॉरगेट दैट यू आर दिस ग्रेट एक्टर, डायरेक्टर, thespian, स्टार, पब्लिक थिंकर. I want to ask you this. If as a man of such diverse experience, you were to be asked, what is that one thing that you have learned in life, unburdened with your, persona as a celebrity, as Naseeruddin Shah, the star, what would that one thing be?
To embrace whatever life throws at you. That's I think, the most important lesson that I've learned. Embrace whatever it throws at you, because it could not have been otherwise. There's no point resisting the inevitable.
Thank you very much. That's a beautiful answer. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. Thank you very much for joining us today. आपसे मिलके जितनी बार मैं मिलता हूँ, जितनी बार आपसे कॉन्वर्सेशन होता है, उतनी बार पिछली जो मुलाकात होती है उसकी कुछ ना कुछ कसक बाकी रह जाती है और ऐसा लगता है कि वहीं से गुफ्तगू दोबारा शुरू की जाए. इसलिए आपको हम खुदा हाफिज तो नहीं कहेंगे, लेकिन ये कह सकते हैं कि एक रात वो गया था जहां बात रोक के, फरहत एहसास साहब का शेर है कि एक रात वो गया था जहां बात रोक के, अब तक रुका हुआ हूं वहीं रात रोक के. तो अगली बार तक हम भी इस शाम को रोक के अपने दिलों में महफूज रखेंगे. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया. थैंक यू अगेन. Thank you very much to all our viewers for your presence. On behalf of Link Legal, on behalf of Mr. Atul Sharma and the entire team, I thank you all for being here. And I look forward to having you at various other sessions of this Beyond Law series as well.